Hi everyone, here's the book chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing Trust by Hernan Diaz. This novel has been on my radar since it came out a couple of years ago, but I was trying my very best to avoid it. From everything I knew about it, from a few reviews that I read around, from just picking it up in a bookshop, I knew I was gonna love it. It was almost so far up my alley that it seemed boring to just choose it and read it. I knew it was gonna be a beautiful picture of the opulent world of New York finance, that it was gonna be written in an impeccable, sly, incisive style. I even picked it up a couple times in bookshops. As I said, I read a couple excerpts at random and they were perfect, they were amazing. Whatever, in the end I saw it in my library. I did read it. It's the best. However, I will say that I was expecting it to be a fairly straightforward modern take on an old literary trope, the novel exploring the perversions, the pitfalls, the moral complexities and shadows in the lives of people living in this opulent world of high finance, something a bit like Salman Rushdie's The Golden House, or a modern take on Fitzgerald. I will say that the book is all that in a certain way, but it's also much more surprising than I was expecting. It's very much of a literary puzzle, and a very engaging one at that. You'll realize it fairly soon. As soon as you open the book, start reading from the first page, you get its index, its table of contents, and you realize that the book is actually made of 4 different parts, each of them supposedly written by a different author. It's very difficult to talk about the individual parts, the structure of the book, the nature of this division, without spoiling any aspect of the book's plot, its structure, etc. And I won't, because I think that going into the book cold, I knew almost nothing about its plot when I read it, as I do for really all of my reads. And I think that's the way you should approach this one too in particular. I think if you go into it cold, it will be so much more impactful and you will get so much more out of this puzzle. That's all good, but it's gonna make it hard to talk about the book in the video and to recommend it to you guys. So I'll try to talk about maybe the common themes, maybe the unifying concerns of all these parts and of the novel at large. And the main concern of Trust, if you ask me, is fictions. This is a book about fictions. Money in particular as the main fiction of our world, this imaginary thing that rules our life and that we strive for all our existence, but also fiction in the more general sense of storytelling, fictions, the kind of fictions that build our worlds and build our reality. Andrew Bevel, the finance tycoon at the heart of the novel, at one point says that his job is to be always right. And when he's not right, he has to bend and alter reality so that he ends up being right in the end. And that's a very effective, very powerful definition of what the world of someone like him, somebody who effectively gambles with these immense amounts of money in order to make a killing in the financial world. That's what they do. They change the world through commerce, through trading, through investment, so that the outcome, the new world that they've shaped, is one where their fortune can continue to rise. It reminded me very much of a quote from Hernan Diaz's Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, where Junior reflects on dictators and on the fact that dictators always hate writers. They're always imprisoning writers, they're always trying to get them murdered. And Junior reflects on the fact that that's not because dictators fear writers, because they think that writers have this angelic, salvific power that is going to threaten their domain. It's because dictators can recognize the competition. And I think that's very true, and I think the message there is that these men of great power, dictators, financial tycoons, very much like writers, they're in the habit of reshaping reality, of changing, altering reality so that it fits their agenda and what they're trying to impose on the population. Trust is extremely clear-eyed and focused when it comes to the fact that fictions, and I'm talking here about books, about novels, narrative nonfiction, the kind of fictions we interact with on a daily basis, always have an agenda behind them and can't help but bend in some way the lives of the subjects they're talking about. Because ultimately the world we inhabit doesn't really make sense, whereas fictions have to make sense. A story has to have a certain beginning, middle, and end, a certain message, a certain type of meaning. And to get one from the other, you always have to bend reality in a certain way. And the book explores this in the way several different men bend and alter the life story of a woman, a very unique woman called Mildred, for various different purposes. The reason why Andrew changes and alters Mildred's character in his retelling of her life is maybe a bit more obvious, but even Harold Vanner is changing her, is altering her in the course of Trust for purposes that have to do with his agenda, with, well, writing an effective novel. Even Ida, who among these various storytellers is most aware of the fact that storytelling inevitably alters, cannot fully do justice to a person's life, even she cannot help but feel that she has a right to tell Mildred's story, that she has a right to access her life and include it in her writing and in her fictions. Mildred, as I said, the enigma, the art of the novel, is incredibly compelling and surprising and mesmerizing and hard to wrap your head around. The solution of her enigma, which does get revealed toward the end of the book, reminded me a lot of the solution to some of Agatha Christie's best novels. I'm thinking of maybe 10 Little Indians, maybe Murder on the Orient Express. It's the kind of solution that is at once really obvious and awe-inspiring. And the comparison is not random and didn't pop into my head. It's because crime novels, Agatha Christie and other crime novels from the early 20th century are very much a leitmotif in the course of Trust and come up again and again. I probably neglected to mention this, but Trust is actually set in that era. It's set mostly in the Roaring 20s and the Depression era, 1930s in New York, and it captures this world beautifully, both through its descriptions, the attitudes and the character of the people inhabiting the novel, but also through its literary style. The first of the 4 parts in the novel, which is called Bonds, is a small masterpiece in its own right. It's written entirely in a style that is very much reminiscent of the style of novelists such as Edith Wharton or Henry James, but with a certain modern spin that makes it much more enjoyable and much more accessible. I actually don't really like Henry James very much. What little I've read of his fiction, I've really struggled with. I struggle with the style, I struggle with the syntax, so that I really can't read beyond it and really wrap my head or immerse myself in what's actually happening in his fictions. Whereas I loved the first part of this book. It's very much an homage that still adapts this sort of style and this sort of attitude to storytelling to a modern sensibility and what is ultimately a very modern novel. I think Trust is fantastic. It's exactly as great as I was expecting it to be. It's a marvelous literary puzzle. It's written in a fantastic, incredible style. I would recommend it to anybody who is at all comfortable with, well, fiction, and especially if you have an interest maybe in that era, in the 1920s and 30s, maybe you're a fan of F. Scott Fitzgerald's fiction, or again Henry James, definitely I would recommend it to you. The only caveat is that if, like me, you go into the book cold without knowing anything about its plot, about its structure, you'll have to suspend your disbelief for the first half of the novel, because it's going to look as if what you're reading doesn't necessarily make too much sense. There were definitely moments as I was reading the book where I started thinking, is this ever gonna form a broader picture? Is this ever gonna connect? And it does. I promise that it all does in the second half of the book. So just be patient, I would say. Thanks so much for watching the review, and if you've read Trust, I look forward to hearing whether you were equally enthusiastic. Let me know what you thought in the comments, as always. And yeah, thanks to my patrons for supporting the YouTube channel. And bye everybody.